Okay, so today we're going to do a webinar titled Essential Communication and Leadership Skills for Entrepreneurs. And I am joined here by my wonderful friend and colleague, Emily Vajjala. And so we're going to walk you through some useful things in the webinar today to give you just a little bit more information about who we are as well, though. We are St. Louis based entrepreneurs as well. And so we were talking about how starting a business or getting your business going or even just maintaining it once you've already started it is really difficult. And one of the things that we felt benefited us was that we already had well-developed communication skills since we already practiced that, which helped us with our initial proposals when we were trying to get funding, because we were able to, present ourselves and communicate our ideas in a really effective way. So we wanted to do a webinar like this so we could reach out to other people, especially in the St. Louis area and beyond, to help them with their communication skills, because as entrepreneurs, we all know it takes a lot of time and effort, and any help you can get is usually really appreciated. So let's move on to our next slide. Today, we're going to go over several things. We're going to talk about how to manage communication anxiety or nervousness when you're talking to potential customers or clients or investors, how to manage impressions, whether that's in person or in writing or through marketing, how to assess your leadership style so that you can more competently and mindfully lead your team, also how to manage a team, and then we're going to talk about leading people through the decision-making and problem-solving process. So like I said, we are St. Louis-based entrepreneurs. We actually have an interesting trajectory. So even though we're business partners now, we started out as in a teacher-student relationship. I was a professor of both Emily and Chris's, and that developed into a friendship. And then, 8 or 9 years later, developed into this business group together. And we do a few different things with our businesses. We do communication consulting, and we also do some online skill and professional development through our platform called the Communication Leader Academy. And then we also do one-on-one consulting as well as public speaking and presenting coaching, whether that's in person or virtual, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. And then we have another side of our business too that we're starting this summer, which is in real estate investing. So we definitely like to keep busy, as you can see. And so here's Emily and I, and you also get to see a picture of our other business partner, Chris Wagner, who is supporting us today, but not presenting today, but check him out in another webinar that's coming up. All right, let's go ahead and dive into our first topic. So managing speaking anxiety and nervousness and apprehension. So I'll probably use those words interchangeably at different times. And, that's kind of like the elephant in the room, because a lot of people have some degree of speaking anxiety, especially when they're talking to a group of people. And the statistic that I put there is that 70% of people have moderate or moderately high communication apprehension or speaking anxiety. So one of the first things we always like to tell people is that you're not alone. This is not a unique problem that you have. There are plenty of other people who experience it. And that's one way that you can kind of start to help yourself manage it a little bit better. Also, as longtime public speaking teachers, we've worked with thousands of adult learners in a lot of different contexts to try to help them improve their speaking confidence and skills. And confidence really is about half the work. And some people have more confidence naturally than others. But like I said, that 70% statistic shows that you're not alone if you do experience some degree of communication apprehension. But, as an entrepreneur, you have to speak and present your ideas to get your business off the ground, and then do even more speaking and presenting to keep that business sustained. And so one of our freebies that you're getting today for attending the webinar is our top 10 ways to manage nervousness about speaking and anxiety. And this list comes from established research that we've been exposed to as communication scholars and experts, but a lot of it comes too from our 25 years of teaching experience and our work as consultants and coaches. So make sure you review those tips, but I want to go into a little bit more detail about a few different specific tips and tools that you can use to manage your speaking anxiety. So the first one of those is called systematic desensitization. And I always kind of joke with people that I'm working with that kind of sounds like some kind of medical experiment or something that you would be signed up for, because it does have a very clinical sound. But systematic desensitization basically just means that the more you do something, the less novel it becomes. So once it becomes more familiar and routine, obviously the correlation with that is that anxiety and uncertainty decrease. And so a personal story about that, my mom works in information technology, and she has, her whole adult life. And she's someone who was really, really, really afraid of speaking to a group of people. But as she continued to get promoted, from a computer programmer up to eventually a department head, she noticed that she had to do more speaking, because, if you just want to stay in the same job you're in, you don't really have to speak and present much. But if you want to advance, you do need to be able to present your ideas confidently and competently. And so she was very happy to have a son who's also a public speaking expert. And I did help her with some of this stuff over the years too. And she eventually got a lot more comfortable with it. And so that's basically how systematic desensitization works. Another one is relabeling. And if any of you have ever been in therapy, you've probably already heard about relabeling a little bit, but it's also thinking about public speaking in a different way. So instead of thinking it as a speech or a pitch, think about it more as a conversation, because we may not have a lot of experience speaking or presenting or pitching ideas or whatever, but we all have experience talking to people. And so you can draw upon that experience and, build from there, so that you're not feeling like you're doing something completely alien to you. Another thing to keep in mind is, in terms of relabeling, a lot of times we think that everybody's focused on us, that they're kind of nitpicking the way we look, or they're, critiquing our ideas. But things always feel more exaggerated for you than they do for your audience. Keep in mind, 70% of people have moderate or moderately high speaking anxiety. And so because of that, people are very forgiving. They see someone who's speaking or presenting, and they, they're like, I'd be nervous if I was doing that too. So people aren't paying as much critical attention to you as you think they would. Another thing is to see speaking as an opportunity, because it is an opportunity. Speaking and presenting well is considered a high visibility skill. So people who do that are people who get noticed, and those are usually people who end up, getting promoted or getting the clients or expanding their business or whatever. Another one that I really like is vocal warm-ups. And so that might sound a little cheesy, maybe you've seen Anchorman, when Ron Burgundy is kind of going through his toy boat, Unique New York. The arsonist had oddly shaped feet is also a weird one that he uses. But this is actually something that, professional speakers use on a regular basis. So even though it might seem a little silly, it's something that's tried and true and is really useful. And I go into more detail about that in the courses that we teach, because it is something that anybody can do. It can also be something, if you're presenting with a team, that you do before you present, as kind of like a warm-up and team building activity too. But aside from the vocal warm-ups, there's also breathing techniques and physical relaxation techniques. And those are good to teach people, I've found, because the reason we have anxiety is because our body naturally releases adrenaline when we have this fight or flight mechanism. And, you can't really stop your body from involuntarily releasing those hormones. But through breathing and relaxation exercises, you can make your body release endorphins. So deep diaphragmatic breathing, certain stretches, and other things you can do make the brain and the body release endorphins, which is the natural antidote to stress-causing hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. So that is something you can actually do that can help bring your heart rate down, and all those other things that are more involuntary reactions. Okay, so let's say you've managed your speaking anxiety, you're getting in front of a group of people. So at that point, you need to think about your impressions that you're making. And so being able to confidently speak and present goes a long way in being able to create a positive first impression. And, our strategies for how to create a good impression are going to change depending on the channel. So there are different strategies you might use for impression management if you are meeting someone in person versus in writing. So sending someone an email, for example, or through virtual meetings like we're doing now, or through your marketing messages as well. And so in our more detailed consulting and online courses, we go into more detail about how you can adapt strategies for your different types of audiences. But impression management has a lot of factors. Okay, so you've got the nonverbal component of it. So that includes things like posture, your physical appearance in terms of how professional you look, eye contact, facial expressions, and even a handshake, which I know we haven't been doing much of during COVID, but I've heard a lot of people kind of gripe about intergenerational differences, and especially kind of talking about Gen Zers who, can't properly handshake, or they don't know how to introduce themselves to people. And so, that's that anecdotal evidence is interesting, but it's not necessarily backed up in research. But even that is something that you can learn, right? So you can learn how to more confidently present yourself through those nonverbal characteristics. But of course, your message is also important too. One of the most important things is to keep your thoughts organized, especially when you're talking to another business owner, to an entrepreneur, to someone who might become a client, to somebody who might invest in your business. So you need to be able to have like your key points ready in your head, because you never really know when you're going to have a networking opportunity and you're going to need to present to that person what it is that you do, what value you can offer them as a client or as an investor. So you kind of got to figure out how to balance your sell, so those key persuasive points, but also balance that with rapport, so that you're actually connecting with the person as a human being. And one of the best ways to do that is by telling stories, which I've already modeled a couple of times here, because I told you the story about how we came together as a team. I've also told you the story about how my mom rose through the ranks and had to engage in more public speaking. So little stories and narratives like that do help connect more beyond just the persuasive sell to the human connection. One of the things that we can also help people with in our speaking coaching is in helping people develop short pitches, and these are often called elevator speeches. So, your 30-second to 1 minute long explanation of what it is you do, but you should really have about 3 different versions of those. So you should have a version when you're first meeting someone, a new networking opportunity where you're kind of giving them the basics. You have one where you think they might be interested. So in that one, you're communicating more of the value added. So here's what value I can get for you. And then you have somebody who's already interested. How do you have an elevator speech that's a call to action for them to say, all right, I know you're interested in this. How do we move to the next step? So that's something we can help people come up with in our speaking coaching as well. So the last thing I wanted to talk about here before I transition to Emily is the halo effect and the horn effect. And I've always enjoyed teaching this in my classes because my students, my adult learners, really respond to it. And it's also easy to remember because you've got the halo and the horn. But it basically describes this psychological and cognitive process through which we put more weight on our first impressions. And not only more weight on them, but they tend to persist longer. So the first impression sticks longer, even if there's other, behaviors or whatever to the contrary. So just to explain that a little bit more, with the halo effect, if you have a good reputation, or even better, if you have a shared connection with someone, and that connection is known before you have your first meeting, whether that's, in person, like I said, virtual, or via email, that halo effect, because you have a shared person, is going to follow you as long as you back up that first meeting with a good message and with your rapport. So even if you have like a stumble in terms of credibility after that, that halo effect is going to really benefit you. The same thing is true with the horn effect, but in the reverse. So if you have a shared connection and that person maybe didn't say, maybe they had a bad experience with you before, and you may not even know that going in, but you may have a lot to overcome in that respect. So that's why reputation and social networking and all those things are really important, not to burn bridges and all that. Just to wrap this up, to help with making a good first impression when you are emailing with potential customers or clients, you're also getting 2 free email marketing templates today that you can use in your own business. So now I'm going to go ahead and transition to Emily, who's going to talk about how knowing your leadership style is an important factor in entrepreneurial success.
Yeah, so it is really important to understand what your leadership style is naturally, but it's also important to recognize that you really shouldn't be falling back on just one leadership style. You should build up your communication competence so that you can actually tap into any of these 4 leadership styles that you see here on the screen. And so before I get into those four in particular, I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of different leadership styles, and the ones that I've most commonly come across are the autocratic style, the democratic style, and the laissez-faire style. And you'll see those a lot in communication textbooks, which I know because I've taught out of countless communication textbooks, and those are usually the ones that you'll see referenced there. The autocratic style being the authoritarian style. It's usually demonized as the leader that you don't want to be. The democratic, it's going to be the glorified one where the leader that gets the people to participate and gives that power to the group. And then the laissez-faire is your laid back leader. So the leader who just kind of lets the group take charge, and they're not really doing anything to facilitate that necessarily. They're just kind of laid back and letting that group do it, and they're stepping in when necessary. So what I want to do is pivot a little bit from those three styles and look at these four directive, supportive, participative, and achievement styles that are a little bit more nuanced than that. And the nuance being too that all four of these styles are 100% appropriate. You could definitely tap into them, but there are some contexts where they are more appropriate than others depending on what that situation is. So the directive leader is going to be sort of like your autocratic leader, where they are sort of like the bossy boss, right? The person who takes that direct approach to communication, and they might tell people what to do. And you might say, okay, well, who wants to work with somebody who's kind of taking that direct approach and telling people what to do? Well, the answer is sometimes when you're dealing with groups who are really inexperienced and they need someone to tell them what to do, well, then that's when you're going to need a directive leadership approach. And the same thing is true for emergency situations. If there is an emergency, some sort of crisis, and we need someone to take charge, then of course the directive leader is going to be really valuable in that context. And so unlike the autocratic style, which just is sort of demonized the directive leader, it's really a similar thing, but it's understanding and acknowledging that there are situations where that directive leader is so valuable. And I've been told that I can sort of be the bossy boss sometimes, so this is something that I've tapped into many times, and oftentimes with pretty good success. The supportive leader is going to be the leader who is relationship focused. So they are focused on building the relationships among their group. So that's going to be really valuable, especially in situations where maybe you have a brand new team who've never worked together before. In order to be effective as a group, you want to kind of build those relationships and get people comfortable working with each other. And then they're going to ultimately be so much better getting those tasks done because they've built up that relationship. The participative leader is going to be the leader that most likely mirrors the democratic leader from the three leadership styles I mentioned at the beginning. So that's going to be somebody who gives that power to the people, lets the group, the individuals take charge, and they're there as a facilitator getting people to speak up and make sure everybody has a say in the decisions that the group is coming up with together. And then the achievement leader is the visionary leader. They think outside the box, and they're sort of a cutting edge leader. And so you might think, can I do more than one of these things at once? Yes, you might be doing a participative thing and also be an achievement leader that's visionary at the same time. So there is some overlap there. So you don't want to think of these as mutually exclusive. And so one of the really interesting things about leadership style is that there is no right or wrong style, but there are right and wrong contexts to tap into each one. So to be a competent communicator, you have to be flexible and you have to know when to tap into each style. So for example, the directive leader, like the autocratic leader, might not be somebody that groups will appreciate in every situation, but like in the emergency situations, it is super helpful to have someone take charge. And the example I love to give is Captain Sullenberger, Sully, more commonly known, who landed the plane in the Hudson River, and everybody survived that landing. He took directive action, he decided what to do, and his actions directly saved countless lives, right? So that's the example that I love to use when we talked about those directive leaders. You can go to the...
We're going to do our poll.
Yes. So while all of these leadership styles, if you are being the most effective leader, are appropriate, we do tend to lean more towards some leadership styles than others. So my question for you all who are here today is, what type of leader do you tend to tap into the most naturally? For me, it would definitely be a directive leader. I can definitely be bossy. But I also recognize that there are situations where the other three leadership styles are appropriate, and so I would want to pivot away from that natural instinct into one of these other three as well. So what do y'all?
Well, it looks like we have a very supportive, well, participative leader is the one that came out on top this time. So that's good. I think, are you done with the leadership styles?
I am.
Okay. All right. Let's jump back into this. And next, I'm going to talk about effectively leading and managing a group. So we're kind of building on these concepts in a particular order, which I hope you find useful, because we kind of talked about speaking anxiety, how you can, before you even start to put your message out there, try to get yourself in the right place to do that confidently and competently. And then, we moved on to talk about some other ways that you manage impressions and then your leadership style. So now let's say you've got all that figured out and you've got your team. So how do you effectively manage your team over time? Because any business is going to have at least one team, even if it's small. And so at OverArching STL LLC, our business, we have a 5-person team, which is pretty easy to manage. And one of the reasons is because we happen to get along relatively well. And I think one of the other reasons too is because we all know a lot. Obviously, we're experts in communication, but we also know how to apply that to a group and team context. So knowing more about the dynamics of small groups and the various roles that people play within a group can help you monitor your team and proactively work to keep the group functioning before something negative happens. Because, talking about leadership, that's really part of the role of a leader, especially if you're thinking about as an entrepreneur, the person who's responsible in a way for all of the people who work with you and for you. Then you kind of are the captain of the ship or the captain of the aircraft in Emily's example of Captain Sully. So you need to be able to look at that 30,000-foot view and see when things might be going in a direction that's not intended. Because if you can be mindful and be a monitor of that, then you can try to use some of the communication and leadership concepts and skills that we teach to try to intervene in that before it becomes a problem and hopefully not a crisis. So a couple of the things that are really key factors in managing a group are socialization and team identification. And that's really key in the early stages of getting a team or a group off the ground. But it's also important throughout, because there'll be different challenges. You might have different launches, whether it's different products or different ideas. And so once you get through one of those, the group dynamics might change or reset. And so you can't just let a climate go once you've established a supportive communication climate where there is good socialization and team identification. You've got to keep that going, especially as you bring new people into your business or your team. So, and that's important too, because the communication climate is part of the soft skills. We think a lot about how groups and teams are meant to complete a task. So you have a task, you have a problem to solve, you have a decision to make. But for that to happen effectively, you also have to have your interpersonal needs met by the group, your identity needs met by the group. And so being a good monitor of the socialization process and the communication climate as a leader can really help you do that. And there's been a lot of demand for soft skill training that's skyrocketed over the past couple of years. So people are starting to realize that these soft skills, as we call them, are necessary to get the hard skills done. So you've got to have good communication and cohesion if you want your team to be productive and get the task done or the output done. So like I said, the goal for any group or team is usually coming up with a solution to something or completing a task. And one of the best ways that happens is through synergy. And synergy is a term that's overused, and I know a lot of people are tired of it, but it really is a concept that describes what happens when you reach a level of communication and collaboration in a group that the ideas that they generate and the output that they generate is much higher than what any individual could have come up with, right? So individuals working can have great ideas, they can have great outputs, but if you get a good group of people together, when that synergy happens, it really takes it to a next level. You get more creativity, you have more kind of playful ideas that you can work through, and the things you come up with are going to, exceed what one person could do. So synergy, even though it's an overused word, is still really important. Okay, and so one of the places where synergy happens, or you at least want it to sometimes, but it very often doesn't, is in meetings. Okay, so one of the freebies that you're getting today is how to effectively run meetings, which, we've all sat through a lot of meetings, and we probably all thought, I really wish the person running this meeting had a better idea of what they're doing. So one of the things that we're here to help you do is to help you run effective meetings so you don't have people on your team thinking that about you. A kind of staggering statistic is that about 15 million meetings are held each day in the United States, and that's according to the Harvard Business Review. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, why do we even have meetings? Okay, the fundamental reason that we have a meeting is to get a group of people with different experiences and viewpoints together in one room or virtually to share their knowledge and or to solve a problem. But of course, meetings are often criticized for being worthless, as a waste of time, as unnecessary. So aside from the tips and the resource that you're getting today, here's some other things to think about. The first thing is, ask yourself, is the meeting necessary? You'll find that often a full meeting isn't necessary to get what it is you want as a leader to get done. Sometimes things are better resolved through a phone call or a face-to-face chat or an email. But of course, there are times when that's not going to do it. So ask yourself these questions to figure out if a meeting is necessary. So the first question you ask yourself is, what is the goal of the meeting? And once you figure that out, you can start, weighing the pros and cons of, is a full group meeting actually necessary? A second question is, what would be the consequences if we didn't have this meeting? So you get through the goal, you're like, okay, there's a good goal. You get to the second question. If the answer is that there really wouldn't be any consequences to not having a meeting, then maybe you should probably reconsider whether the meeting's necessary or not. If you decide to go through with the meeting, you need to make sure you do some evaluation and assessment. Ask yourself, how will I judge whether this meeting was successful or not? Because maybe you'll realize at the end of a meeting, okay, actually, we didn't need to have that meeting. And that's okay. You might have had a meeting that was unnecessary, but if you wouldn't have reflected on it at the end, you may not have ever realized that. And so now you're having this weekly meeting that everyone on your team dreads, and you don't know that because you don't really go through those 3 questions that I just proposed. Okay, so here we go with our next thing. If you decide you want to have a meeting, it's likely that there's going to be some decision making and problem solving that's going to go on during that meeting. And so Emily's going to tell us more about how leaders and entrepreneurs can engage more systematically in the decision making and problem solving process.
Yes. So I cannot tell you how many meetings that I've been to that were utterly useless. And I think the number one thing that I can recognize that was going wrong in those meetings was that someone had called a meeting but wasn't really willing to listen to what the group's input was. It was just a meeting for the sake of a meeting to sort of feign that we'd be making a decision as a group, but the decision had already been made and we were just there to kind of pretend like we were inputting with the information when we really weren't. So with the decision making, the most important thing to remember is to center the group in that decision making process and not to forget that, there's a reason why we are all here meeting together. It's not because one person is going to do everything. That could just be an email where we disseminate, this is what this person decided. The meeting is for getting that collective ideas going and remembering that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So one of the things that you're really going to have to deal with when you're doing something with decision making and working together as a group is problem solving, something that everyone is always going to have to work on individually, and it becomes even more nuanced when you're doing it as a group and you have a lot of input and you're trying to come up with a problem where everyone is going to appreciate the solution, which is next to an impossible task. So luckily, we have really smart people who have looked at problem solving and come up with a 5-step process to solve problems, and that person is Dewey. And we have this 5-step process here for you. And then our last freebie for you is actually, I've made a little handout that is Dewey's 5-step process with some elaboration, but I'll elaborate it too here for you as well. So the first thing that you have to do when you're solving a problem is define what that problem is. If you're trying to solve a problem but you don't know what your problem is, you're going to have a hard time, right? And so one of the common mistakes that we make is we're trying to solve a problem, but we haven't really taken the time to understand what that problem is, and we're actually trying to solve a symptom of the problem instead of the problem itself. So really looking at the problem and trying to figure out what the root of the problem is to solve that issue is really important. After you are confident that you know what that problem is, the next step is to analyze it, to understand the problem, what's going on here, why is it a problem? Just understanding, maybe sometimes we might recognize something as a problem, but when we start to analyze it, we realize that maybe it's not even a problem. But other times we'll analyze it, but yes, this is a problem, we need to tackle it. And once we understand that problem and what it is, that's when we move to the brainstorming process and generating solutions. And as a group, there are a lot of different ways to do that. But the most important thing is to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and not to really start criticizing ideas until we've heard all the possible ideas. So that free thinking, free flowing thought is really important in this process. And remembering again, just like Rich said, synergy. You'll come up with better ideas when you're working together as a group than you will independently. So building off of each other's awesome ideas to come up with even more awesome ideas in this process is really important. And then the next step, step 4, is evaluating your solutions. Once you have these awesome ideas, some of them will be more awesome than others, but that's the point, right? Sometimes you'll have a bad idea, and that bad idea will spark in somebody else a better idea. And so that becomes important. You evaluate those solutions and think about which ones are more realistic than others before your final step, which is implementing that idea. And the step that we often forget is assessing the solution that we put in place, because occasionally we'll put a solution into place, and if we fail to monitor it, we might not notice that actually we haven't solved our problem at all. Our solution's not working. So we want to make sure that we are paying attention to our solution, making sure that it's working the way that we think it will be, and also just making sure it's not causing more problems, because then it's our solution ends up causing more problems than it solves. So that's also really important, is not only implementing your solution, but keeping an eye on it and making sure that it's working and working the way that you think it will. Which leads me into decision making, because coming up with that decision and deciding which idea that you want to land on is also something that's pretty nuanced. And so leaders will play a really key role in that decision. And some of the factors might be like, what are the influences in decision making? The personalities of the people in the group are going to ultimately influence that. You will also want to think about how you're going to generate ideas to solve your problems. Are you going to do brainstorming? Are you going to write things down independently and then share them? Or are you going to shout ideas out and have someone write them down at the front of the room? How are you going to generate those ideas and work together to do that? How will you make the decision? As a leader, are you going to make that decision yourself? Are you going to try to get group consensus? In larger groups especially, getting a consensus, getting everyone to agree is going to be really difficult. So what do you want to do if there is some tension, people aren't agreeing on your solution? Or you want to do a majority rule. What are the pros and cons of doing that? Sometimes a popular idea isn't always a good idea. So what are you going to do in that situation? And it's also important to recognize that occasionally there will be conflict. It's inevitable. People don't always agree. Sometimes when you're thinking about the personalities of the people involved and how they might clash with one another, there is inevitably going to be conflict. So what are you going to do to address that conflict once it does come up? So all these are really important factors to think about when you are going through a decision-making process. And it's really nuanced. We have an entire course just on decision-making where we talk about these things in a lot of detail. So it's a complicated thing. If problem-solving decision-making was easy, right, then we wouldn't have so many problems. So it can be a very nuanced thing. You have to always consider the context of the situation and the people involved. It'll change from place to place to place, from group to group to group.
Exactly. So I'm going to do a little wrap up, and then I have another poll that I would like to ask our attendees to help us as we continue to plan content for future webinars. So here's a review of what we talked about today. Successful entrepreneurs and communication leaders do the following. So manage your anxiety and nervousness about speaking. Some of the key tips that we shared are to try to channel that nervousness into positive energy, because when you're presenting your ideas confidently and competently, they're going to be more likely to be well received, because people like that kind of nonverbal expressiveness, the nonverbal warmth. So the nonverbal, remember, is really important along with the verbal. And again, you can use some of the other tips like relabeling and relaxation exercises to help you as you prepare for that, for those pitches or those meetings. Another one is to make good impressions. So make sure you have a clear and confident message, whether you are greeting people in person, virtually, in writing, or through your marketing messages. Make sure you know your leadership style. So assess your leadership style. One of the things we forgot to mention that you are getting today as a free resource to take away is an assessment that you can do to help figure out where you fall as a different type of leader. It's not the exact 4 that we talked about today, but there are definitely similarities, and that's a useful tool. One of the things too, just to mention in terms of assessments, that we have as part of our consulting and communication business is a whole suite of assessment tools that we have created or adapted or are using that other people have created that measure and can assess various things related to your communication and leadership skills to help find out where your strengths and weaknesses are, to set plans to meet those weaknesses, etc. So, this assessment you're getting today is one example of many such tools that we have. Make sure you effectively manage your team, keep the lines of communication open, model good leadership. So using all the things we just talked about in the review, model those effectively for the people on your team, and then make sure you are organized to show that you value your team's time, especially when you're meeting, whether in person or virtually. And then in those meetings, when you are having to go through the decision-making and problem-solving process, use the structured processes that already exist. So in our decision-making and problem-solving courses that we have, we walk through the Dewey's steps. We walk through brainstorming, evaluating ideas, choosing a solution. So all of those things are covered. But make sure you follow those steps. And then once you follow them, you'll get in the habit of using them. So you won't even have to sit and think about how, okay, I need to do step 3 of Dewey's problem-solving method. Once you get into the habit of it, not only will you start to automatically go through these thinking processes in a more structured way, your team will start to expect it as well. And so it's almost like a conditioning that happens. And once that happens, you become even more effective and productive as a team. But remember, you still got to work on team socialization and everything. That's not going to last forever. You got to keep putting that work in as a leader. So that brings me to another poll that I wanted to share, because we like to collect feedback from people. Over the past few months, we've tried to get some feedback from people via surveys and Facebook, and that's been really valuable. But while we have you as an audience today, we would like to ask you the following. So thinking about whatever role it is you're in now, because you may already have a business, you may already be an entrepreneur, maybe you're aspiring to be an entrepreneur, or maybe you're working in a job that you already are into. So the first question gives you some options there. So what is your biggest issue you face when it comes to communication and leadership? Presenting your ideas and products and services clearly in person, presenting those clearly online, leading or managing your team, or creating a strategic plan, mission, and vision. So if you see the poll there and you want to click on the screen, that would be great. And then also my next question isn't showing up. Anyway, the other question was basically if there are other issues that you face that aren't included in that list that we came up with, drop those in the chat, because like I said, we want to get feedback from people so that we can adapt our future webinar content and our resources and our freebies that we are giving you all so that we meet those needs. Okay. let's see. I was just checking the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything. So the majority of people selected presenting ideas, products, and services clearly online. And that makes sense because, I mean, just like our business, especially during COVID, I mean, most of what we're doing has been presenting ourselves online. And, you know, through our website, through our social media, through email marketing. And so we definitely know that that's a struggle and definitely something we've kept in mind as we develop our curriculum, and we will continue to keep that in mind as well. I can't see anything for the other challenges. Can you see that, Edwin, or anybody? I think it looks like 2 people responded, but oh wait, I know how to do it. I think. Okay, no, I don't see it. But anyway, we'll look at those and make sure we respond to that as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up. I want to pull this back up for us. So a couple things we'd like to ask for you to do after, of course, we thank you for coming to be a part of this today, is please send us feedback. We would love feedback on the webinar. Let us know what content was useful for you or what content you would like to see. So you can put that on the Facebook event. You can put it on our Facebook page. You can email us. All of our contact information is available on our social media as well. Also, connect with us. So we're on every social media platform except for Pinterest, basically. So follow us there. We're trying to grow our following as well. And, you know, we're targeting the St. Louis area, especially because even though our services are open to anyone, we're really proud to be a St. Louis-based business and also continue to learn more. So we already have several courses that are available that you can look at, but we have a new course that we're launching on June 14th that is specifically for entrepreneurs. And so it's going to take a lot of what we talked about today, but go in more detail. And then also, we're going to do more free webinars, and you'll have more free resources coming to you as well. So I want to, again, thank you for participating today. Thank you to my lovely presenter and friend and colleague, Emily. Thank you to Megan and Edwin and Chris, also on our team, who did great work to help get us ready for this today as well. For those of you who are wondering when you're going to get your freebies, you will get an email from us shortly after the webinar with all 5 of those wonderful freebies that you can download and start to use today. All right, any closing thoughts, Emily?
This was so much fun. I'm so glad that you all were able to join us today. I loved hearing your input on the polls. The presenting ideas online, I'll tell you, one of the running jokes that Rich and I have had since, I don't know, it's been like a decade, is that I have technology gremlins. So doing anything online, even though I've been teaching virtually for over a year now, it always makes me a little nervous. I'm wondering what's going to go wrong, but this went pretty well. So I'm right there with you, though. When I get nervous about presenting my ideas online, that's me too.
Yep, but you got to try, you got to practice. That's the only way to get better, right?
Exactly, just like we learned in that first thing you talked about managing your nerves.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for attending, and we'll be in touch shortly via email, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you.